Thank you, Billy. It certainly is good to see all of you here this evening for our evening worship service. A lot of things you could have chosen to do tonight, but you chose to be here, and appreciate your attendance here. I want to thank all of you. Casey had invited a coworker this morning, and she came along with her husband and two of their children, and her parents came, and they live in Edgewood, and the McNeeses actually know the parents, and they had very complimentary things to say about the folks here and the greetings that came their way, and so that speaks well of you all, and we, of course, personally appreciate that, and that's no surprise, but we appreciate that and your ability and your willingness to express yourself and be welcome to them. Do you ever long to get away from it all? Just for a while. I know Billy and Cheryl talked about going to Branson. It's nice to kind of just get away from it, isn't it? It would be nice to every once in a while just turn off the cell phone, wouldn't it? I know that when I was working, I'm actually unemployed right now. When I was working, I always had to carry my phone with me because I could always be called at any time. And there's actually this big burden that's been kind of lifted since I don't have to carry my phone all the time. I'd kind of get panicky. I'd say, oh, my phone, where is it? I got to get it because I might be texted, or we have a thing called perfect serve. I might be perfect served. Someone may contact me. Ever want to just throw away the date book, right? And not worry about it? Ever want to just leave work early, right? Go to the park. Just relax, watch the ducks. When I was a student at Freed-Hardeman, things were a lot not as hectic back in the day. And I remember we would say, and I know Riley's not listening to this, let's just skip class and let's run off to Chickasaw, which is a state park about 10 minutes from Freed-Hardeman. So it's like, let's just skip class and let's just go to the park and just soak in nature, right? So sometimes you want to do that. Would it be great just to leave work early and take off and do something? I remember reading several years ago, Steve Flatt, who used to be the preacher at the Madison Church of Christ and eventually became the president of Lipscomb University. I remember one day he said he took off work early. He rented a convertible and picked up his wife from work and said, let's just take off. Let's just go somewhere, right? Wouldn't it be great to be spontaneous like that? But you know what? There's dishes to do. There's grass to mow. There's the car that's got to be washed. Dinner's got to be fixed. There's email that has to be replied to. There's bills that have to be paid. The house has to be cleaned. And there's walls that have to be painted, right? And so there's no time. That sounds rather fanciful, and we may think that was the time of our youth when we were much less, we had a lot more free time, and we were more carefree, and we could just say, let's just run out to Chickasaw, let's just run out to a state park. There's no time today, right? We're all busy. In many cases, the husband and the wife are both working. We've got kids. It's like Grand Central Station, right? We're running kids to this practice and running kids to this practice, and we're doing this and we're doing that. We're just too busy to unplug. And so off we go, back to the grind, back to that routine that we know so well. And so what happens to our blood pressure, right? And what happens to our cholesterol, right? Because we're not taking care of ourselves. And so we don't eat right either, do we? Because when our life is so crazy like that, we go, let's just eat out tonight, right? And so eat out usually means what kind of food? Healthy food or unhealthy food? It usually means unhealthy food, right? And so we're running through to Taco Bell or running through to Wendy's, and so we're not eating right as well. And it just kind of adds to our overall anxiety. This evening, as I preach to myself as well, I want to instill within you the guts to just let go, to find that quiet time, to meditate, to rest, to spend time with your family. And to do so, we need to look, you're not going to believe this, we need to look at Lot. That's who we're going to look at tonight. We need to look at Lot from the Old Testament. And so we're going to spend some time tonight, if you have your Old Testaments, we're going to spend some time in Genesis chapter 19. And so first of all tonight, I want to talk about the times. The times. So, Sodom and Gomorrah. Need I say more, right? The times. Sodom and Gomorrah. Cities whose names have become immoralized due to the wickedness found within them. God had enough, right? He couldn't let this cesspool of sin continue to exist. They had to be destroyed. Their influence, not to mention their venereal diseases, could not be allowed to spread any longer. In fact, things were so bad, and it's important always to remember this perspective. We often talk about, America and the problems with America. And we do have problems, obviously. We have moral problems, obviously. But you couldn't even find how many righteous people? 10. 10. And Lot was included in that number, I'm assuming. Couldn't even find 10 righteous people. If 10 righteous people had been found due to this back and forth negotiation between Abraham and God, the cities would have been spared. As you know, Abraham's nephew, Lot, lived in Sodom along with his wife and his 2 daughters and their spouses or their fiancés or something. Not quite 100% sure what they were. Before the total destruction of the cities, God sought after this family to spare them. And so that's the times. So what was told? So Lot was told a few things by the angels who were sent to rescue he and his family. So let's look at verses 12 through 16. Then the men said to Lot, "Whom else have you here? A son-in-law and your sons and your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because their outcry has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has sent us to destroy it." I've said this before. I had a professor at Freed-Hardeman. He's passed away. He would often say, I don't know when God's going to return again, when Christ is going to return again, and none of us do. But he often felt like it would be at a point when the outcry was so great that God had no choice but to destroy the earth. And that's kind of the situation here. Verse 14. And Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters and said, "Up, get out of this place, or the Lord will destroy the city." But he appeared to his sons-in-law to be jesting. And when morning dawned, the angels, now notice this, they've already told what's going to happen. They urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." Verse 16, but, I'm reading New American Standard, but he what? Hesitated. New American Standard says he hesitated. So the men, look, this language is rich here. So the men did what? Seized. They seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his 2 daughters. And why was this? For the compassion of the Lord was upon him, and they brought him out. It seems like almost forcibly brought him out, and look at that language, put him outside the city. It's like they had to grab him and his family, pull them out. They hesitated, pull them out, and just plop them outside the city. They were told to get out. And God's mercy literally shoved them on their way. It's kind of interesting. when you think about all this and kind of the sociological impact of all this, that it's like Lot was an urbanite, right? Lot the urbanite, where Abraham was the rural man, the man of the field, I guess. But Lot somehow was drawn to city living. That's the best way I can see it. In fact, as you remember, he and his family had been abducted, remember that? In a military raid, and he had been rescued by his uncle, Abraham. And even then, where did he go back to? He went back to the city. It was like he had this thing for city living. I've lived in cities and I've lived in small towns, and I like cities, but you would think that Lot would kind of get the message, right? But Lot was attracted to city living. And that's important. We're going to talk about that here in just a moment, the significance of that and how he hesitated. He didn't want to leave the city. He had to be shoved outside of the city, even though it was going to be destroyed. And we all know about the wickedness of the cities of the valley. He was told to go to the mountains. Now, our theme today, right, we're talking about mountains. He was told to go to the mountains. Look at verse 17 of chapter 19. And it came about when they had brought them outside that one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, and do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, lest you be swept away." Now, God is coming in the form of these angels, This is God. These are God's messengers sent on this very compassionate trip. The message to me, I don't know about you, very clear, right? City's going to be destroyed. They've pulled them out and they say, listen, see those mountains over there? Escape, run for your life, don't look back. Seems very clear to me. In fact, later, those mountains would be called the mountains of Moab. These mountains laid east, southeast from the doomed cities. The word mountains comes from the Hebrew word har, and it means hills or mountain country. That's where you need to go. This location stood in stark contrast to the riches and fulfillment of pleasures that had plagued Lot's countrymen and turned their hearts to evil. Yes, the angels are saying, leave, if you will, the advanced urban life that you know and go to the rugged mountains. Leave the sophisticated life that you know and go to the rural mountains. The mountain was a place of refuge, a place of safety, a place without all the pressures, temptations, and wickedness that had overtaken the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and those other cities in the valley. But wait a minute. Lot refused to go to the mountains. Let's look again here at the text. We know very clearly what was said. Now, look at verse 19 and verse 20. Now, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness. It's almost like Lot is kind of, this kind of buttering up act here, right? You've been really gracious. You've been really kind. This is really nice that you've done this for us, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Now behold, this town is near enough to flee to, and it is small. Please let me escape there. And then in parentheses, is it not small, that my life may be saved? Does this make sense to you? This doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So that leads to some turmoil. First of all, there's a lot of lessons here, right? One is when God says do something, what? Do it, right? Don't try to come up with an alternative plan. And here's the thing. He came up with an alternative plan, and God allowed him. God preserves our free will, right? God had a better plan, an overarching plan, and yet Lot said, I think I got a better plan. That's not a good idea, right? And God said, I'm God. I kind of know what's best, but if you insist, I'll allow you to do that. And he did. So we're going to find some turmoil that's going to come about because of the decision that Lot made. Let's look at verses 21 through 23. And he said to him, Behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the town was called Zoar. The sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. So he ended up in Zoar. Now, I don't know. I can't get inside the mind of Lot. But maybe Lot felt he wasn't physically able to escape to the mountains before the destruction. But don't you think God would have taken that into consideration? I mean, I'd like to think that God would have allowed that as an option because he knew that, he would not destroy the cities of the valley until Lot made it safely to the mountains. It's kind of interesting, and you can probably see this footnote in your text. Zoar means little. Now, in Genesis 14, the town had a different name. It was called Bela, and the name Bela means destruction. And somewhere, do you remember when the 5 kings went against the 4 Assyrian kings because they didn't like the taxes that they were paying, and that's eventually what led to Lot being, taken into captivity and Abraham raising up an army and all that. Well, somewhere between that and this time, the town's name changed. It went from Bela, B-E-L-A, to Zoar. So it went from destruction to a town called Little or Insignificant. This city was slated for destruction. Do you think God had thought this out? It probably very much needed to be destroyed. This small village was spared as a refuge for Lot and his family. Now again, let's think about this for just a moment. These wicked cities, these urban cities that Lot was accustomed to, he said, God, I'd like to go to a city, I'd like to escape to a city that's like the city that you're destroying. Do you think that Lot had somehow become infested with all this kind of crazy thinking? And so God did spare this city. And so this town, Zoar, which means insignificant or small, that's exactly what Lot's life ends up being in terms of bringing honor to God. Insignificant. His ultimate reputation involved everything from incest, further in Genesis 19, to selfishness, back to Genesis chapter 13, to great tragedy in his family years after his death. Lot fathered Moab and Ben-Ammi, who became the fathers of the Moabites and the Ammonites, who were ultimately enemies to who? Israel, right? All of this. Now, there's one more interesting twist to the story. If you thought it couldn't get any more twisted, it does. Lot eventually leaves Zoar and goes where? To the mountains. Right? Is this making any sense? Right? He eventually leaves Zoar and goes to the mountains. And it's here, though, where his troubles really began. He passed by Zoar on the way to the mountains instead of going directly to the mountains, as God had desired for him to do. We always say, what if, and we don't know, but what would have happened if Lot had listened to God the first time instead of trying to negotiate with God's messengers, with these angels? Well, there's no way to know, but I think there are definitely parallels to be drawn. So what about today? Lot chose to not go to the mountain. He chose another wicked city that was slated for destruction. Perhaps, and maybe this is, conjecture here, but perhaps something in Zoar triggered the eventual sin of his daughters. He bypassed God's plan. Lot didn't choose the mountain. That's the message tonight. Lot didn't choose the mountain. And too often today, we make the same mistake. Notice how our culture mirrors in some ways the cities of Sodom. Now, unlike Lot, we can't really physically distance ourselves, and God doesn't call us to do that, right? I mean, we all know, and it was kind of interesting, I think I've mentioned this before, there were a couple issues back of the Gospel Advocate, and the editor of the Gospel Advocate, Greg Tidwell, who preaches at Fissinger and Kinney in Columbus, he actually wrote a piece, and he was quoting from someone, and he said, wouldn't it be great in some ways if we could all just live in a monastery, right? Live in a walled monastery as Christians, and just escape from it all. But he said we can't. I mean, God doesn't call us to do that. We have to be an influence for good in the world in which we live. Even though we can't leave the world, we can unplug from it, right? We can try to get out of its influence. It's interesting, and it's hard to sometimes harmonize all of this, but in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 7, Lot is called just, right? J-U-S-T. He's called just. But apparently, years of living in his culture affected his wife, his daughters, and his sons-in-law. Somehow, Lot was able to still be a just man. And that's good for Lot. But look how it negatively impacted his entire family and all of his descendants. The pull of an evil culture is strong. And we really can't sugarcoat it. We live in an evil culture. We really do. We live in an evil culture. And so, because we do, when given the chance to get away to the mountains, we needed to get away. And when he was given the chance, he still lingered. And sometimes we're the same way. We're given opportunities to get away and we linger. You know, some of the best things that you can do are go to things like CYC. Go to polishing the pulpit. Go to the Freed Hardeman lectureships. Sometimes go to Branson, right? Sometimes you just need to get away from all the things that are here and go to a simpler place. And go to a place where you can soak in God's nature. Go to a place where you can receive instruction, spiritual instruction, and get away from the hustle and bustle of this life. And you say, well, I'm so busy. I only have so many PTO days. I only have so much vacation. I can't do those kinds of things. And you know what? For your own good, you need to do it. You need to unplug. We need to periodically, if not in some cases totally, distance ourselves from the life that most of us have. I'm talking about the music, right? The music that we listen to. I'm talking about the movies that we sometimes watch, the television that we watch, and those devices, right? Whether they're Androids or iPhones or iPads or tablets or whatever it is, we need to unplug. What's the first thing you look at in the morning when you wake up? What do you look at? Your phone. What did somebody post on Facebook last night? Because you really got to know, right? What did somebody put on Twitter? Because you really got to know. What's on Snapchat? Because you really got to know. What's on Instagram? Because you really got to know, right? What's the last thing you look at before you go to bed at night? Same thing, right? Is that good for us? Does it sound like Lot, who can't let go of it? He can't let go of it. And even when God says let go of it, he says, let me go to another city that's kind of like the city that I'm from, right? It's like, I want to go on vacation, but there better be Wi-Fi, right? Right? Because I got to stay what? Connected. But sometimes we really need to what? Disconnect. Now, Casey will tell you this. The best vacations we have been on have been the vacations where we didn't have Wi-Fi and we didn't have a television and we couldn't do any of that kind of stuff and we just had to read a book, right? And we just had to spend time with each other, with our family. We need to spend quality time alone with God, with our families, and with Christians. We need to get away from the pressures of life. They're so powerful and they're so influential. And as with Lot, they can really impact our children. I think that's a big lesson here. Again, it's hard to harmonize all this, but Lot remained just, but his children didn't. And so we might think as parents and as adults, I got this covered. But maybe the influence on our children is going to be incredibly detrimental for them, even though we say, well, we got this covered. Maybe we need to think about unplugging from some of this craziness. Philip Gulley wrote a book where he talks about these kinds of things. He wrote a book called For Everything a Season. And in that book, he writes about gardening and about one former neighbor of his who was a master gardener. This gentleman, this neighbor, this master gardener, taught him, in addition to gardening, that there's a beauty from sometimes just unplugging from life. His friend, whose name was Marvin, liked to sit under the maple tree behind his garage and listen to his vegetables. Marvin said this: "You can hear the corn grow. In July, after rain, if you sit real still, you can hear the corn grow." Now, I don't know if you can really hear corn grow or not. Maybe some of you know something that I don't know, and maybe you really can. But you know what? How many of us have actually what? Listened to it, right? How many of us have really tried to listen to the corn grow? We don't have time for such things, right? Maybe every once in a while we need to unplug and try really hard to listen to the corn grow. So here are some suggestions. Let me challenge you to do this, all right? This week, go in your closet, go through your drawers. Anything you've not worn in a year or two, get rid of it. Maybe it didn't fit, right? You know those clothes that, they don't fit us, but we go, eventually, right? Eventually, I'm going to be able to wear those clothes again. Ha, 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 right? It's been 10 years since you've been able to get into those jeans. Get rid of them, right? So get rid of the clothes that you haven't worn in a year or two. Get rid of those dishes that are sitting in the cabinet that you have never, ever used, right? Take long walks. Walk barefoot in the grass periodically. Let go of some of the clutter that often brings with it so much anxiety. This is so true. The more we have, the more anxious we are, right? Because it's more stuff, and it's more stuff that can go wrong. It's more stuff to repair. It's more stuff you got to put a license on. It's more stuff you have to insure. It's more stuff you have to keep up with. Notice small things. Play checkers with a friend. Spend quiet time in devotion to God. And assemble with the saints every opportunity that you get. Being here tonight is unplugging, right? Now, I can't tell because I don't have my glasses on if you're on your phones right now, right? If I look real well, I can squint 20/20 if I look really well. But you know what? This is 1 hour, and then this morning was another hour, and Wednesday night is another hour where hopefully you don't have your devices unless you're, using it as a Bible, where you're totally not thinking about stuff too much. I know it's hard sometimes. You're thinking about Monday and going back to work and all that, but hopefully this is a real time to unplug, right? And God in His infinite wisdom knew that we needed this time. And we need to assemble as a body. And we all know of people who say, well, I can just worship by myself at home in the living room and all that kind of stuff. No, you can't. The Bible makes clear that we're to assemble as a body of believers. Now, you can do that, but we're also to assemble as a body of believers, and we need this time to unplug. And so tonight, as we close, it's real simple. You have a choice. Are you going to stay in the city, or are you going to go to the mountains, right? Are you going to stay in the city, be the urbanite, or are you going to go to the mountains? Let me challenge you this week and every day to try to unplug from the business of life and try to find quiet time with your family and quiet time with God. And when you're given opportunities like our retreat coming up, right? What a great opportunity to unplug, right? And I know we all got stuff to do, right? I know, right? The garage needs to be cleaned out, you know. We need to get ready for the next yard sale and all that kind of stuff. But it's going to be fine, right? It's going to be fine. Just let it go. Tonight, if you're not a New Testament Christian, the journey begins in the baptism, in the baptistry. The journey begins by being baptized into Christ and having your sins washed away. God will help you unplug. If you are a Christian and you've had difficulty, maybe you've been too stuck in the world and you need to disconnect from the world, let your brothers and sisters pray with you and for you. Let us encourage you and take advantage of every opportunity that this congregation, that the elders provide for us to kind of disconnect from the craziness of the world in which we live. If you need to respond to the invitation of Christ, won't you please come forward while together we stand and sing to encourage you.
When the Savior calls, I will answer. When He calls for me, I will hear. When the Savior calls, I will answer. I'll be somewhere listening for